I was always the quiet one in the family, the one who didn't stir the pot. My name is Amber, and I'm the older sister, though you wouldn't guess it by the way my mother treated me. Growing up, I quickly learned that my role in our family wasn't exactly what I had hoped for. From the moment my parents divorced, everything changed. I was only 9 when my mother's affair came to light, a secret I unintentionally exposed. My father was devastated, as anyone would be, and I found myself caught in the middle of a war that no child should ever have to witness. I told my dad about the affair. I didn't mean to be the one to break his heart, but I couldn't live with the guilt of him being the last to know. I remember the look in his eyes when he found out, and the pain that followed. For him, it was a betrayal so deep that it shattered him. But for my mother, things seemed to stay the same. She never apologized. In fact, she blamed me for ruining the family, as if I were the one who made the decision to cheat. I had to grow up too fast after that. The house was divided, and suddenly, I became the person expected to take on all the responsibilities. My younger sister, Maven, on the other hand, was the apple of my mother's eye. In her world, Maven could do no wrong. While I was left to clean the house, run errands, and basically act like an adult, Maven got all the attention and care. To my mother, I was a burden, an inconvenient reminder of the betrayal she had caused. It didn't matter that I had done what I thought was right. In her eyes, I was the traitor. The divorce was finalized quickly, and my mother took Maven with her. I was left behind with my father and grandparents, who did their best to provide me with love and stability. They tried to give me the normal childhood I'd been denied, but there was always that aching feeling inside me, the sense that something was wrong. Maven, despite all her privileges, was the one I longed to connect with, but she seemed to drift further away from me with each passing year. By the time I reached middle school, Maven and I barely spoke. When we did, it was usually awkward, forced. I later found out that Maven was avoiding me because of our mother's influence. She'd been told by our mother that I had ruined everything, that I had betrayed the family by telling the truth. Even though Maven knew the affair was wrong, the pressure from our mother was too much. She cut me off, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life alone. For years, I tried to reach out to her. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't the villain in our family story, but every attempt ended with her either refusing to meet me or accusing me of being a traitor. It broke me. Eventually, I stopped trying. I focused on my studies, found solace in my new family with my father and stepmother, and I let go of the idea that Maven and I would ever be close again. The years passed. I went to college, graduated, and built a career that I could be proud of. My stepmother, though not perfect, was the mother figure I never had, and I appreciated her for all the love and support she gave me. I married a man who accepted me, flaws and all, and we built a life together. For the first time, I felt like I had a family that truly cared for me. We were happy. Then, tragedy struck. My father, the one person who had always stood by me, died unexpectedly in a car accident. I was heartbroken, but I tried to hold it together for my family. Maven, who had distanced herself so much from me, had to be told about our father's passing. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment that would bring us back together. But when I called Maven to let her know, her response was cold and heartless. "Serves him right," she said. "He deserved it." She laughed as though it was a joke. That moment crushed me. I didn't expect her to mourn the way I did, but I never imagined her to be so callous. She didn't attend the funeral, nor did my mother. I couldn't understand why they didn't want to say goodbye to the man who had given everything for them. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, knowing that Maven and my mother were nowhere to be found when I needed support. After my father's funeral, Maven and my mother appeared, but only because they were interested in one thing: the inheritance. They arrived, uninvited, wearing flashy clothes and makeup that made them look like strangers. The disrespect was palpable, but at that moment, I realized exactly how far they had drifted from me, not just physically, but emotionally too. When the inheritance discussions began, my mother didn't waste time. She walked into the room, making demands, and claiming that I owed them something. "You owe us," she said. "After all the years we've suffered because of you, it's time to pay up." Maven echoed her sentiment. I was floored, After all that had happened, all the pain they had caused, now they were looking to me to settle the score. I had no interest in inheritance. My life was stable. My family didn't need the money. But the disrespect they showed my father, and the way they twisted everything to make me feel like the villain, pushed me to the edge. They mocked him, belittled him, and laughed at his pain. After everything he had done for them, they turned the situation into a petty, selfish game, and I had had enough. I stood my ground. I would not give them what they wanted. It wasn't just about money. It was about principle. I had no intention of rewarding their cruelty. I offered them my share of the inheritance, but I could feel the weight of their insults and accusations pressing down on me. They continued to mock me, and that's when I knew I would never allow them to control me again. This was the moment I decided that I had to sever ties with them for good. I would not let them destroy my life any longer. I had fought too hard for everything I had, and I wasn't about to let Maven or my mother take it all away with their selfishness and cruelty. The tension that followed my father's death lingered in the air like smoke. The family I once knew, however fractured, was now almost unrecognizable. Maven and my mother, with their sudden appearance at the inheritance meeting, had left me in shock. It wasn't just the way they showed up, flaunting themselves as if they were entitled to everything, but it was the weight of their cruelty. They didn't even bother to pretend to care about my father. They didn't even give him the respect he deserved after everything he did for them. No, it wasn't about mourning. It was about money. After they left that day, I sat there in the empty house, staring at the walls as the reality sank in. I knew what kind of people they were, but I had always hoped deep down that maybe, just maybe, they would change. I had hoped that time, distance, and the difficult circumstances would soften their hearts. But it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Not this time. I didn't care about the inheritance. I wasn't interested in it. I had a good life. Stable, loving, and built on the hard work my husband and I put into our careers. I didn't need a payout from my father's estate to feel successful. But Maven and my mother, they were different. All they saw was opportunity. They didn't care about the legacy my father left behind. They didn't care about the relationships they had broken. They only cared about what they could get out of it. I felt a wave of bitterness flood through me every time I thought about Maven's words. She mocked our father, calling him stingy and small-minded, as if she knew anything about sacrifice. She was so caught up in her own world of materialism that she couldn't see the bigger picture. To her, everything was about appearances and entitlement. And then there was my mother, the woman who had hurt me the most, the woman who had abandoned me in my darkest moments, the same woman who had left me to grow up alone while she paraded around with her own selfish desires. When I looked at her, I didn't see her mother. I saw someone who used her children as pawns in a game that only served to protect her own ego. She never cared about me. She never tried to understand the pain she caused. I had lived most of my life trying to prove to her that I was worthy of love. But now I realized I had nothing left to prove. She wasn't the person I thought she was. She had never been. After the inheritance meeting, I tried to keep my distance, but the phone calls started. Maven, always demanding something, usually money, or at least an apology from me. She claimed she was the one who suffered, that I owed her. The calls came at all hours, her voice thick with desperation, but I had no desire to engage anymore. She always had an excuse, always a reason to make me feel guilty for something that wasn't my fault. She was so determined to paint me as the villain, the one who destroyed everything, but I wasn't having it. I decided to stop answering. The anger, frustration, and pain were all still fresh in my mind, but I knew I had to cut ties. I had to put my family first, my children, my husband, and the life we had worked so hard to build. I couldn't let Maven's and my mother's toxicity poison what we had. But the phone kept ringing. One day, as I sat in my living room, trying to get some work done, I finally picked up. Maven's voice was strained, but this time it wasn't the usual demands or insults. It was different. "Amber, I need you," she said, almost pleading. I didn't want to get involved again. I didn't want to open that door, but her desperation caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to help, to be the sister I once was, the one who tried so hard to keep the family together. But another part of me was tired. Tired of being the one to fix everything. Tired of the endless manipulation and emotional blackmail. What now? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. It's about Mom, she said. I need your help. She's been acting strange, Amber. I think something's wrong. She's been talking about getting married again, and it's bad. She's been messing with people, getting involved with shady men. I don't know what to do. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I had lived through enough with her and our mother. You're asking me for help after everything that's happened, I said, my voice quieter now, but firm. After you turned your back on me, after everything you and Mom put me through, now you want me to help? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Maven's voice cracked as she spoke. I know I messed up, Amber. I know I've hurt you. But I need your help. Please. The words hung in the air between us. I thought about it for a moment, but I already knew what my answer was. You need to fix your own mess, Maven. I'm done. You made your choice a long time ago. Now you live with it. I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call and set my phone down. I could feel the weight of the conversation sinking in, but it was a weight I was willing to carry. It was time to let go. Maven had chosen her path just as I had chosen mine. I had my family, and they were enough. The pain of the past wasn't something I could undo, but it didn't have to define me anymore. The rest of the day passed quietly. I spent time with my husband and kids, feeling the peace of my home. Maven's words, her constant need for help, it all felt so far removed from the life I was now building. I had no more room for their toxicity. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me wondered what would become of Maven. Would she ever realize the damage she had done? Would she ever change? But those were questions I had no answers to. All I knew was that I had chosen my family. And with that decision, I could finally breathe. Days passed, but the weight of Maven's request still lingered. Even after the call, I could feel the burden of her toxic presence trying to claw its way back into my life. It wasn't just the inheritance talk or her manipulative games, but the way she had tried to reshape our past into a narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain. Her words echoed in my mind. You're the reason everything fell apart. Her attempt to rewrite the story of our childhood, of our family's history, was the final straw. It wasn't just the inheritance anymore. It was everything. She wanted to believe that I was the one who tore everything down, that I had somehow betrayed her, even though I was the one left picking up the pieces when my mother chose her own selfish path. I had been a child when I told our father about the affair. I wasn't the adult in that situation. I was just the one who saw the truth. And the truth is, something Maven never wanted to face. I had lived my life trying to let go of the resentment, trying to build something for myself despite the broken family I had come from. I had my husband, my children, my career, and I was determined to protect them all. I worked hard to provide a loving, stable home, something I had longed for growing up. My children would never have to feel the pain of abandonment the way I had. They would never know what it felt like to be neglected by the people who were supposed to care for them. But Maven's call had stirred up emotions I thought I had buried deep inside. Her plea for help, her half-hearted apology, and the constant guilt trips, it all felt like a trap. She wasn't asking for help. She was asking for me to clean up the mess she had created. She wanted me to fix her life when she had made no effort to fix our relationship. And then came the next phone call. It was late, and I had just gotten the kids to bed. My husband, Jake, and I had finally settled into our evening routine, but the ringing phone shattered the peace. The number on the screen made my heart drop. It was Maven again. This time I was determined to end it once and for all. Amber, it's about Mom. Her voice cracked through the line. I don't know who else to turn to. I didn't hesitate. Maven, I've told you before. I'm done. I don't want to hear it. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice lower, more pleading. Amber, please. This is serious. Mom's been involved with so many men, and it's all falling apart. She's causing a mess, and I don't know how to get out of it. I'm in too deep. I sat in silence for a moment, processing her words. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the legacy our mother had left behind. The toxic behavior, the lies, and now the marriage fraud. I was disgusted, but at the same time, I felt a pang of sympathy. It was clear Maven was drowning in the chaos our mother had created. But I knew better now. I had learned the hard way that Maven wouldn't change. She would never take responsibility for her actions. It was easier to blame me, to shift the blame onto others, than to admit the truth. "Why should I help you, Maven?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've never taken responsibility for what happened. You've never cared enough to fix things." Her silence spoke volumes. She couldn't deny it, not anymore. The years of pushing me away, of siding with our mother, of blaming me for everything, it had all led to this moment. There was no coming back from it. "I can't do this, Maven," I said firmly. I've tried to be there for you, but you've made it impossible. I'm done." I ended the call without waiting for a response. As I sat there in the silence that followed, I felt a strange sense of relief. The emotional weight I had been carrying for so long was finally starting to lift. I had given up so much to try and fix things with Maven, to try and fix the broken family we had. But I realized now that some things couldn't be fixed. Some people couldn't be saved. I went to bed that night, my mind racing, but I knew I had made the right choice. I had done enough. I couldn't keep trying to change things that were beyond my control. Maven had made her choices, and it was time for me to make mine. The next few days were quiet. No phone calls from Maven, no more guilt trips. I focused on my family, on my children, and on the life I had worked so hard to build. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't responsible for Maven's mistakes. I wasn't responsible for the mess our mother had left behind. All I could do now was protect the family I had created, the family that truly mattered. But just as I was starting to feel at ease, Maven showed up at my door. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was outside playing with my kids when I saw her car pull up. My heart skipped a beat. My first instinct was to turn and run, but I stood my ground. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been strong for so long, and I wasn't going to let her tear down what I had built. Not this time. Maven stepped out of the car, wearing a strained smile, but there was nothing genuine in it. "Amber, can we talk?" I crossed my arms, my stance firm. "We've talked enough, Maven. What is it this time?" She hesitated, looking uncomfortable, but then her voice dropped lower, filled with emotion. "I know I've done things I can't take back, but I need your help. Mom, she's got herself in too deep, and now I'm stuck cleaning up her mess." I shook my head, my resolve only strengthening. "This isn't my problem anymore. You've made your choices, Maven. I can't help you." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt the faintest tug of sympathy, but I knew better. This wasn't about me helping her. This was about Maven trying to pull me back into her web of chaos, trying to make me responsible for her choices. "No," I said firmly. "I'm done." And with that, I closed the door. For the first time in my life, I finally felt free from the weight of my family's dysfunction. Maven could keep making her mistakes, but I wasn't going to let them destroy me anymore. I had my own family to focus on, and that's where my energy would go. The past was over. It was time to move forward. I didn't hear from Maven for a while after that. She seemed to disappear into the chaos she had created, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd start taking responsibility for herself. But life, as always, had a way of showing me just how wrong I could be about people. The next time I heard from her, it was a letter. No call, no warning, just a letter. It was strange to receive anything from her, but there it was, sitting in my mailbox. I opened it cautiously, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between us, the years of tension, betrayal, and disappointment. The words she wrote made my stomach turn. It was all about inheritance. Again. But this time, it wasn't just about money. It was about guilt. Maven was blaming me for not giving her a fair share. Her words dripped with accusations, as though I had been sitting on some treasure she was entitled to, just because we shared the same biological mother. She wrote how I had ruined everything, and that I should have known how much she needed that inheritance, how much we both deserved it. I didn't even know where to begin. It was as if the years of separation and hurt had never happened. The words she used to justify herself, the manipulation, it was all there, unchanged. She was still blaming me for things that happened long before we were ever adults. She still believed that she had the right to take, to claim, without ever giving anything back, just like our mother had taught her. I remember holding the letter in my hands, staring at it. I couldn't believe she still saw me as some sort of obstacle to her plans. I had made my peace with the inheritance long ago. I didn't want it, didn't need it. But to Maven, it was all about the entitlement. And once again, she expected me to fix things for her. Jake was there when I read it. He knew the situation with Maven, had seen how I'd struggled with her over the years. I showed him the letter, and his face darkened as he read through it. When he looked up, his eyes held a mixture of frustration and concern. "You can't keep letting her do this to you," Jake said quietly, his voice firm. "This is your life now. You've worked too hard to let her pull you back in." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. I had worked so hard to build a life I could be proud of, a life of stability and love. I couldn't let Maven, or anyone, undermine that. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I'd been taught my whole life to carry burdens that weren't mine, to take responsibility for things I had no control over. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had my own family now, and I needed to protect them. That evening, I called Maven. The phone rang several times before she picked up, her voice as casual as if nothing had happened between us. "What is it now, Amber?" she asked, her tone indifferent, though I could hear a hint of tension beneath it. I took a deep breath, gathering the strength I needed. "Maven, I've had enough. I'm done with this, done with everything. I don't care about the inheritance, and I don't care about your excuses anymore." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I could imagine her sitting there, probably shocked by my words. She had always thought she could manipulate me, that I'd cave when it came to family. But not anymore. "You don't get it, do you?" Maven replied, her voice laced with frustration. "You have everything. You have a family, a life. Why can't you just share? Why can't you just help me for once?" I swallowed the frustration building in my chest. "I've helped you, Maven. For years I've tried. But you've never once taken responsibility for your actions. I'm not your fix-it person. I'm not your backup plan anymore." Her response was quiet, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to come up with another way to manipulate the situation. But I wasn't giving in. "Goodbye, Maven," I said, my voice steady. "Don't call me again." And with that, I hung up. The following days felt like a strange kind of peace. Maven didn't reach out again, and I didn't have to carry the weight of her toxic presence in my life. But the relief was also mixed with sadness. I'd spent so many years trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix, and I couldn't help but wonder if there would ever be a time when Maven would truly change. Would she ever realize the harm she'd done to herself and to the people around her? I didn't know, but I couldn't wait around to find out. I had my own life to live, and it was time I focused on that, on the love and stability I'd built with Jake and the kids. I spent the following weeks diving into my work, spending more time with my family, and enjoying the quiet joy of simply living. I knew that as long as I remained true to myself and my values, Maven's drama would no longer hold any power over me. One day, while I was at the park with the kids, I received a call from my lawyer. It wasn't Maven this time, but a formal letter regarding the inheritance. Apparently, Maven was trying to contest the will, demanding more than what she was entitled to. I felt a mixture of irritation and amusement. This wasn't about the inheritance anymore. It was about her ego, her need to take from others. I told my lawyer I didn't want any part of it. I had made my choice long ago. My life was mine to live, and the family I had built was all I needed. I had no room for anyone who didn't value me for who I was. And just like that, I knew I had made the right decision. There would be no more drama, no more manipulation. Maven's path was hers to walk, and my path was mine. I'd finally found peace. It didn't take long before I saw the changes. At first, they were small, subtle shifts that weren't immediately noticeable, but eventually became impossible to ignore. My life began to feel lighter, not because I was avoiding difficult conversations, but because I was no longer carrying the weight of others' expectations. The constant need to prove myself, to explain my choices, to defend my actions, it all fell away. I focused more on what mattered most, my family. Jake and the kids were my priority. The laughter at the dinner table, the quiet moments spent reading together in the evenings, the warmth of the family I had built. It all made everything worth it. I didn't need to fight for my place anymore. I had earned it. The work-life balance I had been striving for finally became a reality. I threw myself into projects that inspired me, exploring new opportunities that aligned with my values. Every achievement felt like a victory, not just for me, but for my family. I had once felt trapped in the roles others had imposed on me, but now I was in control of my own destiny. Jake, ever the supportive partner, continued to stand by my side through it all. We had our fair share of struggles, but we faced them together. Our marriage, once tested by the turmoil of family expectations and interference, had only grown stronger. We communicated better, we trusted each other more, and we were united in our mission to raise our children in a home filled with love and respect. As the months went by, I found myself growing even more comfortable with the boundaries I had set. I had decided that the toxicity from my mother and Maven no longer had a place in my life. It wasn't easy, and I still felt a pang of sadness at the lost potential for what could have been, but I knew deep down that I was doing the right thing. I had to protect my peace, and in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than any inheritance or recognition. Then came the surprise. It was a phone call, but this time, it wasn't Maven or anyone from her side of the family. It was from a relative on my father's side, someone who had kept their distance for years. They were apologizing, explaining that they had always seen the way my mother had treated me, the way Maven had followed in her footsteps, and how they regretted not standing up for me sooner. Their words were sincere, and while I appreciated the gesture, it didn't change anything. I had moved on, and I didn't need their approval. What mattered was that I had finally embraced my own worth. The mistakes I had made, the sacrifices I had endured, had all led me here. And the best part? I didn't need validation from anyone to know that I was deserving of the life I had built. The phone call ended, and for a moment, I just sat there, reflecting on how far I had come. I realized that my journey wasn't just about separating myself from the toxic influences of my past, but about growing into the person I had always been capable of becoming. It was about shedding the weight of old expectations and stepping into the life I had always wanted. I had fought for my peace, for my family, and for myself. I had learned that love was something that couldn't be taken. It had to be nurtured and protected. And as I looked around at my life, I knew that I had everything I needed right here. In the end, Maven had gotten exactly what she deserved. Nothing. Her actions had left her isolated, while I had found the family I'd always needed in the people who truly loved and supported me. I didn't need the inheritance or the approval of a mother who had never cared for me. What I had now, what I had built, was mine, and I had never been more at peace. I woke up to a bright morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows and casting a warm glow across our living room. Jake was already up, making breakfast for the kids, and the sound of their laughter echoed through the house. It felt like everything was finally in its right place. I took a deep breath, savoring the peace that surrounded me, a stark contrast to the chaos I had endured for so long. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty about where I stood in my family. The constant emotional toll, the guilt, the manipulation, all of it had been left behind. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, with patience, determination, and most importantly, love. The life we had now was something I could be proud of. It wasn't just about the physical comfort or the material things. It was the emotional fulfillment that came with it. I had a partner who stood by me through thick and thin, 2 children who looked up to me with trust, and a sense of personal peace that I hadn't known in years. Everything I had built, everything I had worked for, was finally coming together. One afternoon, as I sat with Jake on the porch, we talked about the future. We dreamed about the places we wanted to visit, the adventures we wanted to share with our kids, and the life we hoped to continue creating. It was a conversation full of hope and excitement, a stark contrast to the silence and bitterness of my past. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to look back. The past was gone, but its lessons remained. I learned to never underestimate my own strength. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse, but I had come out stronger, more confident, and more in control of my own life. I had learned the hard way that family wasn't defined by blood alone. It was defined by the people who truly loved and supported you. I thought about Maven, about the life she had chosen for herself. I didn't feel anger or resentment anymore. I simply felt pity. She had isolated herself from everything that truly mattered. Her choices had led her down a path where she had no one left to turn to. In contrast, I had everything I needed. I had love, stability, and the respect of those who mattered most. I had a family that supported me, a husband who valued me, and children who trusted me. I had built something real, something that could not be taken away. I didn't need any more closure. I didn't need any more apologies. The only thing I needed was to keep moving forward, to continue building a life of happiness, free from the toxic past. And that's exactly what I was going to do. As the sun set on another perfect day, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I had learned, for the strength I had found within myself, and for the life I had created. I was no longer the person my family had tried to mold me into. I was me, strong, independent, and finally at peace. And that was enough. Story 2. My daughter's future mother-in-law, Linda, laughed loudly and remarked, "Water's good enough for poor folks." Her obscene comment made me nervous, and I questioned whether this was the type of family my daughter was getting married into. Her statements were so unpleasant that I couldn't disguise my unease. Ray, my daughter's soon-to-be sister-in-law, sat close by and turned to face me, her face becoming white. I tried to cover my feelings with a tiny, kind grin. "I'm Sarah Robinson, and this year marks my 51st birthday. For me, life hasn't always been simple. When my daughter Chloe was just 3 years old, I filed for divorce from my former spouse. Our inability to get along was the primary cause of our divorce. No matter how much I attempted to reason with him, he rejected my request to change, refused to work, and drank most of the time. Even as our financial circumstances worsened, he remained unchanged. I took the painful choice to dissolve our marriage after realizing that neither Chloe nor I wanted that type of life. There was no alimony or child support when we were divorced. It was just Chloe and I against the world after that. I had been a homemaker before the divorce. However, I now had to work to provide for the two of us. It was difficult to raise Chloe alone, but I was adamant. In order to be near her, I initially took up menial tasks that I could complete from home. I occasionally made ends meet a day or two before payday, but the pay wasn't fantastic, and money was usually tight. When I ran out of money, I wouldn't eat. I persisted and made sure Chloe had everything she needed in spite of those difficulties. Chloe developed into an intelligent and mature young lady over time. I finally had some spare time after she graduated and got a job. I made the decision to devote that additional time to something I enjoyed, creating handcrafted goods. I established a tiny business out of my little pastime, and I was surprised to see how successful it was. I felt like my life was improving for the first time in years. Then a beautiful thing occurred. Chloe became engaged. Nathan, the man she had been seeing, was employed at the same firm as her. Her supervisor, Nathan, was 5 years her senior. When Chloe gave me a picture of him, he appeared to be a serious, courteous young guy. That she had selected someone who appeared steady and trustworthy gave me a sense of relief, a far cry from the poor example set by her father. Chloe came over to me one evening after supper, looking anxious. "I need to discuss something with you, Mom." Hesitantly, she said. I noticed her apprehensive tone. "Chloe, what's wrong?" Gently, I inquired. "You appear anxious. Is everything all right?" After a moment of nervousness, Chloe stated, "I'm going to marry Nathan," with a bashful grin. Happiness glowed in my eyes. "That's fantastic news." "Chloe, congratulations!" I cried out. She felt a wave of relief. "Mom, I'm very thrilled you're pleased with it." "I was afraid you wouldn't approve," she said. "Why wouldn't I give my approval? Now that you're a grown-up, all that counts is if Nathan brings you joy." I gave a kind response. Chloe smiled and went on. This weekend, I hoped you could meet Nathan. Before the wedding, I would like you to get to know him. I would definitely want to meet him. I enthusiastically agreed. Next Sunday, let's make it happen. At home, I awaited the arrival of Chloe and Nathan, a little before 10 in the morning, at the sound of the doorbell. Chloe was standing there with Nathan at her side when I opened the door. "Nice to meet you, Miss Robinson," he said in a courteous greeting. "I'm Chloe's fiancé, Nathan Carter." I was impressed by his politeness right away. "Enter now." "Welcome to the house," I said. Nathan gave me a box of upscale candies as a present as we sat down. After that, he began talking about how he and Chloe met at work. Clearly embarrassed by his enthusiasm, Chloe blushed as he spoke with a warm smile. "Nathan, quit." Playfully nudging him, she said, "You're making me blush." As we watched them together, I felt optimistic about Chloe's future. But when Nathan abruptly inquired, "By the way, is your father at work today?" The happy mood changed. I hesitated for a second at his inquisitive tone. Chloe was pale as I looked at her. She hadn't told him about our family circumstances, I realized. I cleared my throat and chose to take it head on. "I may not have told Chloe, but I'm divorced. I brought her up alone." I gave a quick explanation. Nathan's face turned blank and his amiable smile vanished. "What's the matter?" I inquired, uncomfortable. Nathan recovered immediately and grinned once again. "Oh, nothing." He told me not to worry about it, but I couldn't help but think about his previous response. Although the remainder of the conference proceeded without incident, I couldn't get rid of the thought that Nathan could be worried about our circumstances. I asked Chloe what Nathan had said about me being a single mother after they had departed. On the drive home, did he say anything? Chloe paused, then answered, "He didn't say much, Mom. Don't stress over it." However, I was unable to avoid worrying. What if Chloe's marriage into a single-parent household was frowned upon by Nathan's family? Would they have issues later as a result of this? Time would tell. "Mom." As soon as she entered the room, Chloe yelled. Her face was particularly black, and her voice sounded serious. I realized right away that something was amiss. "What's the deal, Chloe? You appear really distressed," I inquired in worry. It was highly unusual for Chloe to remain silent for a time. I was concerned when I saw her like this, since she was typically upbeat and hopeful. More than that, she hesitated for a long moment before speaking, her voice low and uncertain. "It appears that Nathan's family is not really pleased with our marriage, Mom," she remarked, a sorrowful expression on her face. I scowled, perplexed and worried. How come they would feel that way? "What's wrong?" Chloe let out a long sigh, glancing down at her hands. "They ponder. They believe that because we are impoverished and come from a single-parent home, Nathan will struggle." It seemed as if I had just been smacked. Anger and pain squeezed my chest. "It's really awful of you to say that," I remarked, raising my voice a little. "Without ever knowing us, how could they make such a harsh judgment?" Chloe gave a quiet nod. Her expression was growing more dejected by the moment. "Mom, it's more than that." Those were Nathan's mother's precise words, and after a little pause, she continued. "We're only wanting Nathan's money," his sister added. "What?" Startled, I cried out. "It's a terrible charge. I'm not even familiar to them. How could they have such a negative opinion of us?" Chloe muttered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Mom, it's so unfair. Their money doesn't matter to me. Like Nathan, I put in a lot of work." Listening to this, I felt terrible for her. Growing up, Chloe had witnessed me working around the clock to support us. As a single-parent family, we had endured a lot, but we had gone so far that we should be humiliated in this way, like we were useless or avaricious. It was quite painful. After calming myself with a long breath, I said, "What did Nathan say about all of this? Did he stand up for you?" Chloe nodded as she glanced up at me. "Yes, he did. He assured them that I had a steady work and that I'm not like that. He even reminded them that I don't really rely on him for financial support because we work for the same firm." I felt a little better after that. "Well, Nathan at least defended you. That's crucial," I said. "It's encouraging as long as he's on your side. But you must be ready, Chloe. After the wedding, things might not change if his family already has this opinion." A few days later. Chloe came over to me once again. Her face was less dejected and more contrite this time. Mom. With hesitation, she started. Before the wedding, Nathan's mother proposed that we hold a family gathering. I arched an eyebrow, uncomfortable. A family gathering? What sort of gathering? According to her, it makes sense for you to have a proper meeting with Nathan's parents prior to the wedding, Chloe clarified. She even picked the location, a posh restaurant close to their home. I scowled. What was said about it by Nathan's mother? Chloe let out a sigh. She informed me that since we are not yet legally married, it would be improper for us to meet in their home. She also picked a pretty pricey eatery. Each individual must pay $500 for the supper. I was too shocked to disguise it. $300 for each individual. That's ridiculous. Why would she pick such a costly location? Why doesn't she invite us to stay at her house? People often do that for their families. Welcomes. Chloe seemed ashamed. Mom, I know you. I find it unpleasant as well. I didn't want to quarrel, though. Nathan even promised to pay us back later if the amount was too high. I was uncomfortable with what she said, but I didn't want to make things more difficult for her. Okay, I responded at last. We'll go if it's important to you. But I want you to understand that this isn't typical behavior, Chloe. They're not showing any deference. On the meeting's day, I deliberately wore modest clothing. I didn't want Nathan's family to believe that I was ostentatious or irresponsible with money. I only put on a little makeup and dressed simply. Chloe and I were shown to a private room at the restaurant when we arrived. Nathan's family was waiting inside already. Nathan gave us a kind greeting. I appreciate you being here, Mrs. Robinson. We appreciate you having us. Despite my kind response, I could immediately sense the tension in the room. Ray, Nathan's sister, and Linda, his mother, were sitting rigidly with icy looks on their faces. Michael, Nathan's father, seldom looked at me. They were clearly not pleased to see us. In an attempt to diffuse the situation, I smiled as I introduced myself. I'm glad to have met every one of you. My name is Sarah. I smiled, but Linda, Chloe's mother, didn't smile back. Rather, she smirked as she sat back in her chair. I hope everything gets resolved during this meeting. To tell the truth, I believe this marriage is a mistake. I felt sick to my stomach. Pardon me, I murmured, attempting to remain calm. Are you from a household with only one parent? Linda stated plainly. That's an issue already. Additionally, it's obvious that you're having financial difficulties based on how simple your attire is. Ray laughed next to her. Poor Nathan, she said sarcastically. He had the option to wed a respectable person, but instead he remained with a low-income mother and daughter. I felt wrath and shame flood my face. I didn't want them to know how deeply their remarks wounded me. We might not have much. But Chloe and I have worked hard to build a good life, I responded quietly. No one's money is necessary for us. Linda gave a harsh chuckle. It's simple to say that, but don't deeds speak louder than words? To his credit, Nathan made an effort to step in. Mom, that's sufficient. He spoke aggressively. Linda just waved him away, despite the fact that Chloe and her mother deserve respect. I'm just being honest, she remarked. Chloe's responsibilities will be yours if you marry her. You would be committing a grave error. Their criticisms and insults continued throughout the meeting. For Chloe's sake, I remained kind, but I knew in my heart that this family would never welcome us. I started to fear what Chloe would experience if she married into such a poisonous atmosphere. Rachel's sarcastic remark annoyed me. I resisted, but her remarks were much too offensive for a first encounter. I didn't want to take the chance of ruining Chloe's marriage. I'm sorry. Despite the rage that was bubbling within of me, I whispered softly as I sat down. Nathan's family appeared amused, maybe because I didn't answer their nasty comments. They looked at each other smugly, as if they were having fun putting me down. Nathan's face became stiff, as Chloe gazed at me with concern in her eyes. His forehead furrows. Although he hasn't spoken yet, he seems uneasy about his family's actions. However, Linda was obviously in a good mood. She said with excitement, "We have a multi-course meal reserved here. The cost per individual is $500. Really? I'm eager. The food must be amazing because it's so expensive, Rachel said, almost bursting with anticipation. Michael grinned contentedly as he nodded in accord. The workers soon started bringing out the food. With bright and colorful appetizers, each plate was exquisitely presented. This was obviously a fine eating establishment, but all I had was a glass of water when I looked down at my own place setting. Just water, no food. The crew had already left the room when I glanced around in confusion. When I realized what was occurring, my stomach dropped. Nathan saw right away. He was looking at the blank area in front of me with a shocked expression. Rachel, meanwhile, started laughing mockingly. "Look at that, huh? How appropriate." She gave a smirk. Chloe's voice was worried as she drew in closer to me. "Are you all right, Mom?" Before I could answer, she inquired in a low voice. Linda let out a big chuckle. Her voice was harsh. She obviously took joy in making fun of me and remarked that poor people may get by on water alone. Her remarks were so needless and offensive that I was powerless to stop myself. "What does this signify?" I asked, trying to sound cool, but I was furious inside. They didn't even intend to serve me adequately, even though they had invited us to this place. Simply put, it was an insult. Linda gave a shrug. Her smile grew. "Oh, are you not just a poor single mother, but also a moron? Did you honestly believe this place would accept someone like you?" Michael laughed and nodded in agreement with her. "Being a single mother makes you feel humiliated, doesn't it? A lady attempting to live alone after her spouse abandoned her. How pathetic." His comments were brimming with contempt as he added. I tightened my teeth in an attempt to control my rage. "My hubby didn't abandon me." Michael cut me off before I could finish. "Yes, of course. Let's be honest, though. No place needs a lady like you." He laughed cruelly and added, "You're just plain flawed and unnecessary." Rachel shook her head and joined in. She mockingly remarked, "I'd hate to end up like Chloe's mother, who works for meager pay and struggles to make ends meet. It's really rather pitiful." After being silent up until this point, Chloe finally said, "I'm very sorry, Mom." Her voice trembled as she spoke gently. I could see how profoundly she was condemning herself for placing me in this predicament, and her eyes were welling with tears. She avoided looking into everyone's eyes and glanced down. That was it. My maximum had been reached. I have to stop allowing these individuals to despise my kid and myself. But before I could respond, Nathan sprang to his feet. "Enough now." His voice reverberated across the private room as he yelled. Anger was hot on his face. "Are you all banding together to attack Chloe's mother in this way? Don't you feel embarrassed about yourselves? For heaven's sake, you are grown-ups." Nathan caught both Chloe's and my attention. His abrupt outburst surprised me. He was obviously angry now, yet he had always appeared cool and collected. But Linda was unconvinced. She continued to smirk as she sat back in her chair. "Oh," she remarked dismissively. "Come on. Poor folks don't need to be defended. Why are you becoming so agitated?" Michael gave a nod of assent. "Don't allow your feelings control you, Nathan." "Oh," he said. "It's simply the reality. It doesn't hurt to point it out. What I was hearing was unbelievable. These folks weren't only impolite, they had no shame at all. I was prepared to defend myself when an unforeseen circumstance occurred." Just as she had been giggling, Rachel stopped abruptly. Her face turned pale as she gazed at me. She mumbled, her hands shaking a little. "No, it isn't possible." Everyone was captivated by her peculiar response. Michael looked at his daughter and scowled. "What's the matter with you? Why are you behaving strangely?" Confused, he asked. Even Linda seemed worried. "Rachel, yours? Ghostly pale? How are you feeling?" Leaning closer, she questioned, but Rachel didn't answer. She continued to look at me. She looked shocked. She paused for a long moment before speaking. "Dad, your business. I believe it's called Glow Crafts." Michael appeared even more perplexed. "It is, of course," he said. "Why do you now bring that up?" Rachel paused, then spoke again, her voice tremulous. "I believe I've already met Chloe's mother at work." Michael shook his head and chuckled. "That isn't feasible. Even the part-timers at my workplace are people I know. She is the only elder lady employed there." The phrase older woman made me scowl, but I refrained, awaiting the next step. Rachel inhaled deeply. "She's not an employee, Dad. She is. She is a customer of our business." There was silence in the room. Michael's expression went from arrogant to perplexed. "What are you discussing?" Even Linda, who had been so self-assured, now uncomfortable. "What does client mean to you? Give an explanation." "Rachel." Rachel turned back to her father after giving me a tense look. "Chloe's mom isn't your typical customer. She is. She is among our most important clientele. She's dressed so simply today that I didn't identify her at first, but now I'm positive." Michael's arrogant look completely vanishes. "What do you say?" His voice was calmer now as he inquired. "Do you mean to say that she is?" I grinned a little, observing how they respond. They appeared to be coming to the conclusion that the individual they had been making fun of might not be as unimportant as they had believed. It seemed natural that Michael wouldn't know me, because I hadn't spoken to him personally before, as I considered this. Abruptly, Rachel got up and started to apologize. Chloe's mom. Her voice was shaking as she continued, "I sincerely apologize for everything that happened." The tone in the room changed when she abruptly apologized. Linda and Michael were perplexed, then abruptly upset. "You're sorry, but why?" Linda's voice was abrasive and defensive as she snapped. "Saying apologies to someone so inferior to ourselves is unnecessary," Michael said, gazing at Rachel. "That's right. It's absurd of you to apologize to a poor woman in this way. Do you not take pride in it?" Rachel, however, was unfazed. She looked to her parents. Her face became grave all of a sudden. "Mom, Dad, the mother of Chloe is not Portal. She actually has a lot more money than any of us, especially Dad." Michael's expression contorted in shock. "What are you discussing?" His voice rose as he asked. He gave Rachel a scowl like though she had gone insane. In contrast, Linda's reaction was one of astonishment. "Just what did you say?" She let out a cry. "You have no right to utter such a ridiculous thing." Rachel was obviously resigned to the circumstances, refused to give up, since it is accurate. Firmly, she said, "The head of a highly prosperous corporation is Chloe's mother. She used to work at my dad's workplace. In the company's reception area, I even brought her tea." Michael's self-assured expression broke as he froze and looked at Rachel. "What? That isn't possible." His voice was suddenly softer, doubtful, yet he still yelled, "Have you heard of Robinson's bags, Dad?" Rachel inquired. Michael's face became white at the sound of the word. He moved his head gently in my direction. There was a mixture of incredulity and horror on his face. I kept my cool and grinned a little. I could tell by Michael's response that he knew the name, but Linda was perplexed. "Robinson's luggage," she whispered, attempting to locate it. Then the understanding struck, and her eyes became wide. "Hold on. Isn't it the brand that's carried by all the upscale department stores? My bag is from there too." As if she needed evidence, she hurriedly picked up the bag she had brought and took a hard look at it. I had to make a remark. "That sack." I smiled calmly as I spoke. "Wasn't that a magazine giveaway? It is a privilege for you to use my brand." Linda was so embarrassed that her face flushed. Unable to look at me, she put the bag back beneath her chair. I took my business card out of my bag at that very time. I gave it to Michael and said hello. "As the president of Robinson's Bags, my name is Sarah Robinson." With shaking hands, Michael accepted the card and gazed at it as though it were a bomb. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish as she bent down to read it. Neither appeared to be able to talk. This was unexpected. At last, Michael spoke in a tremulous voice. "Are you the president?" "Yes, exactly." Calmly, I answered. "We were discussing working together on a new bag line with Globe Crafts. However, I don't think such cooperation will continue given the way you've handled Chloe and me." "How unfortunate." Michael's expression became pale. He stumbled. "Wait, no, you can't cancel the collaboration. At the moment, it is the most significant project we are working on. Should it be canceled, our organization will..." His voice wavered and he paused in the middle of his statement. "What's happening?" Linda inquired, obviously perplexed. She tried to figure out what was going on by glancing between Michael and myself. Michael let out a deep sigh. Now there was urgency in his voice. In actuality, Globecrafts is having severe financial difficulties. Because fewer people purchase handcrafted things, sales have been dropping for years. Currently, the market is dominated by low-cost, prefabricated goods. The firm was meant to be saved by this partnership with Robinson's Bags. He faced me. He was now sweating and his face was pale. He bowed gently and said, Please, Miss Robinson. I sincerely apologize for my behavior. I implore you to think again. Everyone was taken by surprise when he abruptly apologized. Linda was totally disoriented, while Chloe and Nathan both appeared shocked. You're apologizing to her, but why? She made a demand. I still don't understand how serious the issue is, but Michael's statements didn't affect me. He wasn't sincere in his apologies. It was only an effort to keep himself and his business safe. Now I apologize, I replied icily. Do you really believe that a simple apology would resolve everything after everything you've said to Chloe and me? The realization that his apology was insufficient caused Michael's face to crumble. He got to his feet in a desperate attempt to save his dignity. Now clearly uneasy, Linda turned to me and smiled artificially. Well, you'll forgive us since we're going to be family, she added in a casual, light-hearted manner. Stunned by her boldness, I gazed at her. She went on, Oh, and since I'm such a big fan of Robinson's bags, you'll be giving me some products for free, won't you? Before I could reply, we are now family after all. At first, her remarks were so absurd that I was at a loss for words. I was dumbfounded and just gazed at her, but Nathan would have none of it. That's totally wrong, Mom, he stated firmly. You've overreached yourselves. Nathan's harsh tone even appeared to surprise Linda, but she soon recovered, her gaze flitting between him and me. I failed to see the problem with it. In a defensive murmur, she said, I'm only requesting a minor favor. Nathan shook his head, disappointment visible on his face. He said that this is precisely the reason Chloe and I didn't want to meet in the first place. All you've done is make fun of her and her mom. I'm embarrassed by your behavior for the first time. Linda seemed truly mortified. Unable to look me in the eye, she looked down at her hands. Michael, however, stayed still and continued to hold onto my business card as though it were his only hope. I inhaled deeply before gently getting to my feet. Respect, not excuses, is what Chloe and I deserve. Calm but firm, I said, born out of desperation. The meeting has ended. I turned to face Chloe, who appeared relieved but still shaky. Come on, I said softly. We left Nathan's family to clean up the mess they had made as we left the restaurant together. But Linda, who was still indifferent to the situation, commented in a condescending manner. Why not? I assume there is a plenty of stock. There's no harm in giving away a couple. She was really conceited. Clearly uneasy with her demeanor, Michael and Rachel gazed at her with dismay. I remained calm and gave a solid response. Giving out our things is not free, especially not to complete strangers. After all, I don't consider you family. Linda seems irritated by my answer, but I take it that Chloe and Nathan are getting married? We are family because of it. Families ought to provide for one another monetarily. Additionally, you are the president of a prosperous business. Are you not? She said this while maintaining a straight face, as though her previous taunts and insults had never occurred. I was taken aback by her boldness. This was her attitude after all the contempt and haughtiness. Her lack of regret for her past actions was now evident. Nathan eventually lost his patience before I could reply. Mom, he yelled, his cheeks flushed with rage. When you learned that Chloe's mother is the head of a corporation, your perspective was totally altered. Do you not feel embarrassed about yourself? Linda, however, only chuckled. His tirade did not deter him. It doesn't matter, she shrugged. A president must be in possession of more money than they know how to spend. Why don't you tell us a little? Despite her angry remarks, I maintained my composure. Even if Nathan and Chloe end up getting married, I don't intend to establish any kind of relationship with you. Surprised by my answer, I answered calmly. Linda tried to get close to me once again. Don't say that, please. We'll be family when Nathan and Chloe are married. Giving up a bag or two isn't a huge problem, is it? Her voice sounded like she was requesting a minor favor. I was about to respond when Nathan intervened. Mom, he spoke aggressively, staring at Linda. This has gotten out of hand. You're attempting to take advantage of Chloe's mother after continually insulting her. I'm done. Nathan turned to face me with a distressed look on his face. I must confess something, Miss Robinson. I kept the fact that you were the president of Robinson's Bags a secret from my parents. If they found out, I knew they would attempt to take advantage of you. Michael had a startled expression. You were aware. How come you didn't tell me? Had I known, Nathan cut in, his eyes icy. If you were aware, Wouldn't you have behaved just like your mother, using her position for personal gain? Angry, Michael's face flushed. You have no right to talk like way to your parents, he said. You'll be disowned if you continue like this. Chloe looked between Nathan and his father, perplexed and anxious. Nathan, however, stayed composed. With a heavy sigh, he said, It's okay. If it means keeping Chloe and her mother safe, I'm prepared to be shunned. A family that disregards the individuals I care about is not what I need. Linda was taken aback. Why would you say something like that? She sobbed while trembling, following everything that we have done to raise you. Rachel and Michael remained still, unable to react. They obviously didn't anticipate Nathan telling them he was severing his relationship with them. As he went on, Nathan's voice became softer. I want to always treasure Chloe. I don't need a family that doesn't care about Sarah or her. Linda broke down in tears at hearing this. Rachel and Michael simply stood there in awe. Finished. They had brought it upon themselves, yet it was obviously painful for them to lose their cherished kid. I remarked, grinning a little as I gazed at them. Live with your regrets. You'll have difficulties in the future, I'm sure. Nathan's remarks gave Chloe more confidence, so she said firmly, We won't even tell you if we have children. Her remarks were sharp as a blade. Linda sobbed. Please don't do it to us. But despite their entreaties, Chloe refused to back down. Chloe. Together, Nathan and I walked out of the restaurant. The very following day, I found out that Michael and Rachel had been let go from Globecrafts. The head of the firm attempted to get me to change my mind after I told him that I wanted to end the cooperation. I didn't waver. I couldn't work for a firm that has employees that can act in such a contemptuous manner. I clarified that upon learning of Michael and Rachel's actions, the president, who had a daughter around Chloe's age, became enraged, and key partnership that may have salvaged the faltering business had been wrecked by their activities. The lives of Michael and Rachel got challenging after they were fired without warning. It was almost hard for Michael, who was already older, to get a new job. Rachel couldn't get a job either, even though she had only worked part-time because of her father's connections. Housewife Linda had no source of income and was no longer receiving Nathan's assistance. They came to my business in despair months later. They pleaded with you to work with Globecrafts. The president will rehire us if you do. If a partnership isn't possible, at least provide financial assistance. Our family is going through hardship. Considering how they had previously treated Chloe and me, their cries were pitiful. Families support one another. With a quivering voice, Linda said. After demeaning us and calling us impoverished, I couldn't help but chuckle. All of a sudden, you are families, I said icily. Financial help and collaboration are not feasible. Additionally, Nathan has already broken off contact with you, as you are aware. Leave now, please. However, they remained still, attempting to hold on to any hope. At last, I firmly threatened to call the police if you didn't leave right away. Michael became frightened upon hearing this. No, please, we'll leave. We will never return. As he spoke, he dragged Linda along. Their clothing was filthy and old, an obvious indication of their deteriorating circumstances. Irony prevailed. They used to mock those who were impoverished, but now they were experiencing it themselves. I subsequently learned that Rachel suddenly lost her ability to get employment and advance in life. Her days were filled with hopelessness. Her future is dismal. It has been 3 years since then. Nathan, Chloe, and I now share a home. On the other hand, newlyweds frequently live alone. Nathan was adamant. In my opinion, Chloe is safer with you in case something goes wrong. Nathan assists Chloe with housework, despite his hectic work schedule. I sincerely appreciate how kind he is. One day, Chloe came over to me looking serious. She said, "Mom," which made me nervous. "Is everything all right?" Nervously, I inquired. Then a happy smile spread across her face. "It appears that I will soon become a mother." With a gentle pat on her stomach, she declared. Happiness filled my heart. "That's fantastic, Chloe." "Well done," I remarked, giving her a firm embrace. As I saw our joyful future together with a grandchild on the way, Nathan stood next to her, grinning lovingly. My face lit up with a spontaneous smile. I have faith that as a family, we will overcome any obstacles that may arise. Story 3. Sister and her children live at my house for free, is the title of this narrative. However, after calling the police on my wife, they take her away with an overnight bag, and my sister bursts out laughing. Hello everyone! Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Okay, so I'm not even sure how to begin this without coming across as a total jerk, but I'll do it anyway. My sister has been living with me for the last 6 years, and I am 32 years old. As the older brother, I suppose you could say that it was one of those circumstances where I tried to act morally, and everything just went south from there. A little background. At the age of 19, my sister, who we'll name Jess, became pregnant. It wasn't a pleasant scenario, but I don't have to tell you everything. At the time, she had little assistance, and my mom, who reared us both alone, wasn't in the finest financial or emotional position to assist her either. As the big brother, I invited you to stay with me. It didn't seem like a huge problem at the moment. I recently purchased a modest home. It's just a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. Nothing special. It was mine, though. I was proud of the house, which I had saved for years. You know, that seemed like a good base. Jess was only expected to be there for a few months as she reorganized her life. I even created room for her to feel comfortable and occasionally assisted her with the baby at night. The problem is that a few months became a year, then another year, and finally 6 years. In fairness, Jess wasn't entirely worthless. She primarily kept her part of the home tidy, and when her first child grew older, she assisted with small tasks like grocery shopping and cleaning the common areas. However, she never made rent payments, not once. Since I initially didn't want to be that man, I also didn't ask her to. I knew she was having financial difficulties as a single mother, so I felt horrible asking for money, but as time passed, she began to feel more at ease. While residing here, she gave birth to a second child. Asking me about the dad problem is a very different matter. What began as a place to crash turned into her entire existence all of a sudden. She lived in my place. My nephews, her boys, grew up considering it their home. I suppose that since I felt like I owed her something, I allowed it to continue. Jess and I had a difficult upbringing. Despite my mom's best efforts, we were poor growing up, and I kept telling myself that I would become better, that I'd be the type of person who would support his family in times of need. I also enjoy my nephews, to be honest. Despite their loudness and incessant mess-making in the yard, they are wonderful kids. Then I met Amy around 4 years ago. She's my wife now, and I must say, she's incredible. She has been really sympathetic of Jess's predicament, and we bonded immediately. Amy didn't mention my sister living here for the first few years. Sometimes she would say something insignificant. For example, when do you think Jess will be able to live on her own? However, she understood it was difficult, so she remained patient. When Amy came in last year, things began to shift. I understand. Moving into a home where another mother and her 2 children already reside is difficult. There was always an unsaid tension between Jess and Amy, even if they were initially cordial. Since Jess had already established her small area, Amy felt that she couldn't claim the house as her own. This is where everything began to go awry. Gardening has always been Amy's passion. It's her thing. She helped her grandmother in the garden as a child, and has always talked about how peaceful it is for her. She has been eager to begin her own small project for the past year since she moved in. We were chatting about the house one evening a few weeks ago after supper, when Amy mentioned that she wanted to demolish a portion of the front yard and create a garden that would blossom in the spring. Flowers, a few little bushes, and even a small seat where we might sit together were already part of her design. To be honest, that sounded pleasant. Our yard isn't very noteworthy. There are only a few dejected plants and grass. I reasoned that a garden would improve the area's appearance, and I didn't see why I should say no when Amy was so thrilled about it. We discussed hiring contractors to handle the preliminary work, which would include mapping out the area, preparing the soil, and breaking up the grass. In order to oversee and ensure that everything was completed just as she had imagined, Amy decided to take a few days off work. I advised her to go for it since I believed it was a good strategy. Here's the deal now. I completely understand where I went wrong in retrospect. I ought to have explained the strategy to Jess. It's my house, after all, and I don't really have to tell her what I do with it. However, even though it isn't technically her space, Jess has lived here for 6 years, and her children frequently play in that area of the yard. She's done that every day for so long that I probably ought to have warned her about it. The issue is that Amy and I hardly saw each other that week due to our strange schedules. She is typically present during the day when I am at work, and by the time I return home, Jess is winding down and the boys are in bed. To be honest, I didn't think it was necessary to bring up the garden since I didn't believe she would be really interested. In retrospect, that was a foolish presumption. The day the contractors were supposed to arrive arrived. To deal with it, Amy had taken the day off. I had no idea what was about to happen, and I was at work as normal. The contractors began tearing up the front yard as soon as they arrived. Amy accompanied them outside, ensuring that everything was carried out correctly. It was okay at first, based on what Amy later told me. When she said, "Good morning," Jess hardly gave her a glance before continuing on with her day. Then Jess realized what was truly going on. She apparently lost it when she noticed the workers tearing up the grass where her children play every day. Amy informed me that the yelling had suddenly begun. In her pajamas, Jess stormed out of the house and demanded to know what was happening. She said Amy had destroyed the yard and taken away her children's only play area. Jess refused to listen to Amy's attempt to clarify that she and I had already talked about it. According to Amy's description, Jess was yelling. She began shouting at the contractors to halt their work and informed them that they were not authorized to touch anything. "Actually, you don't get to make that call," said Amy. "This is our home." Jess responded, "I've lived here for 6 years," or something similar. "It's also my home, so you have no right to enter and destroy it." Things really got out of control at that point. We'll call her Karen, our neighbor, because, well, you'll see. After hearing the shouting, she made the decision to intervene. Jess and Karen get along well. Her children occasionally play with my nephews, and they have a bond because they are both single mothers. According to what Amy later told me, Karen approached and pulled Jess aside right away, asking Amy why the workers weren't there and what they were doing. Amy made an effort to remain composed, but Karen wasn't paying attention. In the end, she called the police. Yes, the police. When I think about it, I still find it hard to believe. Karen reported that unapproved workers were tearing up the yard when she called 911. She said the owner wasn't home, so Amy couldn't make any changes. I suppose the police have nothing better to do in a quiet neighborhood like ours, which is why they arrived rather quickly, and things got even more ridiculous. Amy tried to explain that she did have permission, because this is her home too, and we're married. But because I wasn't there to confirm anything, the cops told Amy she needed to leave for the night. They let her grab an overnight bag, and then they literally escorted her out of our house. When I found out about all this, I was at work and completely unreachable. I work in a warehouse, so I don't have my phone on me during shifts. I didn't even know any of this had happened until I checked my phone on break and saw about a dozen missed calls from Amy. I felt like an absolute idiot. I left work early, jumped in my car, and spent the whole hour-long drive home just trying to process what the hell was happening. When I got home that night, I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. I walked into the house and the first thing I saw was Jess sitting on the couch, completely calm, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Amy wasn't even there. My wife had been kicked out of her own home, and my sister was acting like she was the victim. "Where's Amy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Jess glanced up, all innocent. "She departed," she remarked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The officers told her she had to. Her tone set me off instantly. I wasn't shouting yet, but I was near. "Why did you call the cops on her, Jess? What the hell is going on here?" That's when she plunged into her narrative, all defensive. According to her, she had no option. Amy and the workmen were tearing up her kids' play space without notifying her, and she had to do something about it. She began talking about how she's been here for 6 years, and how Amy came in and started modifying things without even respecting her. "You don't get it," Jess remarked. "I've lived here for years as well. Without telling me you can't just tear up the yard." What I was hearing was unbelievable. My sister, whom I have been supporting for years, and who has lived here for free, was acting as though she owned my house equally. Your house? This isn't your house, Jess, I said. I let you live here. Therefore, you've been living here. I've been there for you for years, and you pay me back by calling the police and getting my wife expelled. She played the victim at that point. She broke down in tears as she described how much her children valued the yard and how they had nowhere else to play. I wasn't insensitive. I adore my nephews. However, her handling of this was awful. Amy heard you yell. With my voice a bit higher now, I said, you contacted the police, pulled the neighbor into it, and made her seem bad in front of the employees. Who does that? Jess got up and began to shout back as if she was attempting to equal my intensity. I wasn't even informed by you or Amy. When outsiders dug up the yard, I had to find out. You can't just make all the changes without first speaking with me. I've spent 6 years here. I can influence this. I paused. I was so taken aback by what she said that I literally paused in the middle of her statement. Jess, you have a voice. Rent is not paid by you. This house is not yours. I've been providing for you, which is why you've been living here. You don't get to make all the decisions, though. Then she said it. The line that infuriated me, for a period. Tenant rights are mine. You are no longer free to do as you choose. I went cold. Just what did you say? Jess repeated it while crossing her arms. This time, quieter but firmer. Tenant rights are mine. I've spent 6 years here. You can't abruptly change things or throw me out. I also have legal rights. I had to leave at this moment. I was unable to even gaze at her. In an attempt to relax, I walked outside and sat on the porch. My hands were shaking, not because I was afraid, but rather because I was furious. I was out there when Amy phoned. I could tell how distraught she was since she had been staying with her sister. Her voice broke as she replied, I can't believe your sister did that to me. I am your spouse. I was also forced to flee our home by the cops. I was even more irate after learning how wounded she was. I assured her I would take care of it. I informed Amy that this was the last straw. Jess must leave. After a time, I returned inside. Jess remained there, as nothing had occurred. This time, I wasn't sugarcoating things. I informed her that she needed to get out. She gave me a startled expression. What? Ejecting me over a garden? No, I said. Because of the way you handled Amy, I'm throwing you out. You believe you have a greater claim to this house than my wife, so I'm throwing you out. Jess, this is my home. You also went too far. She broke down once again and accused me of being unjust, saying that she had nowhere to go and that I was choose Amy above my own sister. Perhaps I was. I didn't care, though, at that time. She was insulting my wife and acting as like she owned the place, and I wasn't going to let it. I set a due date for her. You have till the start of the new year to locate another place. I mean it. I'll assist you with packing. I'll assist you in finding a location. However, you're leaving. Jess slammed the door behind her and ran straight to her room. I was so exhausted that I stood there for a minute. I phoned a lawyer the next day to inquire about this whole issue of renters' rights. If they just attempted to fight me on it, I didn't want to be taken by surprise. According to the lawyer, Jess may have certain residence rights because she has lived there for a long time, but it would be simple to evict her because there is no contract and she has never paid rent. All I had to do was provide her with appropriate written notice. I thus did just that. That night, I prepared an official notice, printed it out, and gave it to Jess. This is what you're actually doing. With tears in her eyes, she asked me. Indeed. It's time, Jess, I said. I was sorry. I did, of course. I adore her, and she is my sister. However, the yard was no longer the only factor in this. It was about limits, respect, and the necessity for me to prioritize my wife. I emailed Amy that evening and told her everything. The following morning, she returned home. And I knew I was doing the right thing when I noticed how happy she appeared to be back in her own home. For the remainder of the week, Jess didn't speak to any of us. She either brought the lads to her friend's place or stayed in her room. Although I didn't push her, I also didn't give up. After 6 years, for the first time, I had the impression that I was regaining authority over my house. The days that followed were quite stressful. The home felt like a battlefield, and Jess didn't speak to me. She stayed in her room with the boys and only left when necessary, most likely expecting that if she simply stayed quiet, I would reconsider. Amy was still furious, even after returning home. None of this was fair to her. On her first night back, She perched on the side of the bed after unpacking her overnight bag. "Keep quiet." I made an effort to apologize. She shook her head as I tried to explain that I was taking care of things. She added, "I know it's not your fault, but I was humiliated in my own home by your sister. Our house. This has to be fixed." She was not mistaken. Karen, the neighbor, made the decision to stir things up even more the next morning. She walked over as if nothing had occurred while I was outside getting the mail. Her face was plastered with that phony smile, the one people put on just before saying something patronizing. "Hello." I simply wanted to see how Jess was doing. As if she owned the place, Karen leaned against the mailbox and said, "She filled me in on everything that transpired, and I felt awful for her. You know, it's not easy for single mothers." I tried to remain calm while I looked at her for a moment. "I'm going to stop you there, Karen. You have no business here. This incident included my sister, my wife, and me." Karen blinked as if she was shocked that I had said it. "I'm simply watching out for her, you know. She does have legal rights, you know. This is where she's lived." "Hold on," I interrupted her. "You reported my wife Karen to the police. How twisted up is that, do you realize? This is where Amy resides. She is my spouse. It was not your place to interfere." Karen's hands went up defensively. I was unaware that she had the authority to make those modifications. I shot back precisely that point. "You have nothing to do with it. You don't live here, and you have no say in what takes place on my land." Her smile disappeared at that moment, and she had a nasty expression. "Then I suppose I'll keep my distance." Her tone was brimming with attitude as she spoke. For the record, however, Jess is not deserving of being kicked out over a garden. I didn't even try to answer. After turning around, I returned inside and secured the door. I had had enough of being courteous. Jess obviously still didn't understand, so later that afternoon, I took her down for another talk. While the boys were playing video games in the living room, I discovered her folding clothes. She was clearly trying to avoid me, but I wasn't going to let this go on forever. "Jess." Sitting across from her, I said, "We must speak." She didn't raise her head. "What you're going to say, I already know." "Excellent," I answered. "It won't take long after that." I gave her the official written notice that I had already printed out. It was just a restatement of what I had already stated. I would assist her find a place if she needed to, and she had 60 days to move out. Jess's face read when she finally raised her head to see me. "Are you sincere about this?" "Indeed, I am." This was the sour chuckle she gave. "Incredibly so. Are you seriously ignoring my children and myself because of some pointless grass? Are you even able to hear yourself?" I tried to remain composed and added, "Jess, this isn't about the grass. This relates to the way you responded to the circumstance. Amy heard you yell. After embarrassing her, you allowed the neighbor to intervene and call the police. You are aware that you have gone too far." She gave a headshake. Her eyes were filled with tears. "What are we meant to do? You believe that having 2 children and no money makes finding a place simple? You assured me that you would support me no matter what. That was painful. I'm not going to lie. Since that's true, it really got to me. I did assure her that I would support her. However, 6 years is a long period, and I became aware that the assistance I had given had become poisonous. She expected me to carry her forever after I had handed her a crutch. I have supported you." Silently, I said. "I've provided you with a place to live for 6 years, Jess. I've offered assistance with the boys without expecting anything in return. It's time for you to solve the problem, though. You can't stay here indefinitely." She remained silent. She simply sat there and sobbed quietly. For a moment, I nearly felt bad. Nearly. However, I recalled Amy's appearance upon returning home and her feelings of embarrassment after being forced to leave her home by the police. I realized then that I was acting appropriately. Amy and I sat on the couch that evening and discussed everything. I informed her of Karen's brief visit and how I had cut her off. I also informed her about Jess's tears and how difficult it was for me to follow through on my choice. Amy touched me with her hand. She added, "I know it's hard. However, you're acting appropriately. I can't live in a home where your sister treats me like I don't belong even if I love you. She must understand that this is our home." She was correct. We didn't chat much, but Jess began to come out of her room more throughout the next 3 days. She stayed far away from Amy, which was probably best. I believe she's trying to decide where she's going since I've heard her talk on the phone a few times with some pals. At one point, I even heard her moaning to Karen about my lack of compassion. I was steadfast, therefore I didn't care. The last straw for me was the neighbor problem. I texted Karen to let her know that she was no longer allowed on my land. I threatened to call the cops myself and consider it trespassing if she returned. I haven't seen her since, but she didn't respond. Goodbye. There is still a lot of tension with Jess. The home feels unnatural, and she is quiet, but the days are slipping away from me. I meant it when I offered her 60 days to vacate. This is my home, yet I adore my sister. I deserve to live here in peace with Amy. I was standing by my principles now. Amy and I were attempting to proceed with the least amount of controversy possible after Jess gave her written 60-day notice, but just chose to push back because nothing in this situation could ever be simple. She blew me away a few days after I gave her the notice. She had been speaking with one of her friends, who presumably knew someone in the legal profession. What the devil that meant. With a smug air, Jess sat me down and told me that unless I followed the correct eviction procedure, she would not be leaving. She crossed her arms and said, "You can't just give me a piece of paper and expect me to pack up my kids and go. I have investigated it. I am entitled to certain privileges." I tried not to panic. "Jess, what exactly are you discussing? Living here is free for you. Nothing is required, including rent payments and a contract. As a courtesy, I offered you 60 days. She gave a headshake. "Not important. I've spent more than 6 years here. I am thus a renter. You must legally file for eviction. Your wife doesn't like me, so you can't just throw me out." It was unbelievable to me that this was taking place. My sister, whom I had provided a home for, supported, and taken in for free, was now discussing tenant rights as if she had been a paying renter the entire time. I simply left since I was at a loss for words. It took me a minute to calm myself and consider my next course of action. I gave my lawyer another call the next day. I clarified Jess's statement and inquired as to whether she was correct. It turns out that in many regions, a long-term resident may establish residence rights even if they don't pay rent. Although it's debatable, if she refused to leave on her own volition, I would have to go through a legal eviction procedure to get her out. "You're kidding me," I told the attorney. He was serious. He informed me that the good news was that, because there was no lease agreement or rental payments, he simply didn't have much of a legal defense. Unfortunately, the formal procedure would take longer than I would have liked. I couldn't just toss out her belongings and change the locks. That would be against the law. By the book, I had to complete this. I thus made the decision to do it. When I sat Jess down again the following evening, I brought a printout of the official eviction notice I had sent. Calmly but firmly, I told her that I wasn't going to back down. She was heading out. In addition to providing her with the legally mandated time, I would assist her with packing and, if necessary, locate services for single mothers. But there was no question about this. She gave me a sneer. "Would you really subject your own sister to all of this legal eviction? When you called the police on my wife and refused to accept responsibility, Jess, you made this decision." "I'm not the bad guy here," I said. "It was you who stepped over the boundary. You're aware of how generous I've been to you." She didn't answer. She only gave me a devil-like stare before rushing away once again. The home seemed intolerable for the next few weeks. Although Amy and I made every effort to stay to ourselves, there was always a sense of tension in the air. Even though Jess almost ever looked at us, I could hear her discussing my cruelty with friends over the phone at night. She said something loud enough for me to hear one day. Family, I suppose, is no longer important. It hurt. I won't tell lies. Hearing her say that was really painful. I began questioning myself. Was I being too severe? When I ejected my sister and her children, was I truly the villain? But then Amy comes to mind, about how Jess's tantrum forced her to leave her own home and prepare an overnight bag. And I would recall my motivation. This had evolved beyond a garden. It has to do with limits and respect. Jess obviously didn't comprehend two things. To her credit, Amy was really patient throughout this whole ordeal. Even though it was the proper thing to do, I believe that she understood how difficult it was for me to expel my sister. We were sitting on the couch one evening when I simply sighed deeply. "I feel like the world's worst brother," I acknowledged. Amy came over to me and took my hand. You spent 6 years of your life with Jess. When no one else would aid her, you did. But you don't have to keep her around forever. Furthermore, it is unfair of her to treat you in this manner. Or myself. I knew that she was correct. It wasn't any easier, though. Just didn't put forth any meaningful attempt to pack or find a new apartment as the weeks passed. I hoped I would give in and allow her to remain, even though I knew she was taking her time. She even told one of her friends, and I heard it. He's playing a bluff. In reality, he will not follow through. It infuriated me. I wasn't bluffing, but I also didn't want to make matters worse. I began researching ways to get her moving more quickly, discussing resources for single mothers with social services, contacting a few people who might be aware of rental flats, and even offering to pay a deposit if she was successful in finding a home. One day I texted her and put a list of resources on the kitchen counter. These choices will help you and the boys go ahead. Jess, I'm not kidding about the deadline. Later, I discovered that the list was no longer there, but she didn't respond. Things were beginning to change by the end of the month. At last, Jess began packing up minor items, including toys, clothing, and some of her children's books. I remained silent about it. I decided to give her some space if she was finally accepting the fact that she was going to go. She really entered the living room one evening as Amy and I were watching television. Before she spoke, she stood there clumsily for a minute. Are you truly comfortable with this? Me going out like this? For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than rage as I looked at her. I was worn out. I adore you, Jess. My sister is you. However, this cannot continue. It's time to make a new beginning and work things out for yourself. You can't stay here forever, but I'll do all in my power to assist. She didn't dispute. She simply nodded and turned to go. Jess was largely booked by the time we reached the 60-day mark. It was more difficult because the boys didn't appear to comprehend what was going on, but I felt it was the correct decision. On the day of her move, I assisted her in packing her belongings into her friend's vehicle, and when she eventually left, the home was quieter than it had been in years. My sister has been living here for free for 6 years, and I feel sorry for my nephews. I never agreed to be their long-term landlord. I suppose I'm simply curious whether I'm the jerk for ultimately ordering her to go.